Anything that is particularly capturing your interest that goes beyond AI right now?
I'm really liking the shift I'm seeing in the financial services space and how enlightened advisors are embracing change, the landscape, the complexity of needs that clients have, just all in the spirit of making themselves fee worthy and referable, and just that whole shift from having a book of business to having an actual business. That is very fulfilling to be a part of. And my view is in the next 5 to 10 years, I think it's going to be the best time to be a financial advisor. So just, I'll start with there. It's very exciting times.
Yeah, and I think what I heard you saying is really the professionalism of the industry is, I think, continued to advance. And you and I are old enough to know that it was a commission business back a few decades ago, and you really attracted salespeople, people that were very transactional in nature, as opposed to today, where it's really more a relationship-based business. And I think that attracts a different type of person. And there's definitely, as you mentioned, a lot of emphasis on building businesses as opposed to practices or just having transactional relationships with people. So I think there's a self-selection process that goes on there, and yeah, absolutely something wonderful to see.
Well, and it's a very revealing evolution because you see the one group that sort of hangs on and the other group that embraces. And that shift to advisory was massive, obviously from a recurring revenue perspective, but also just a collaborative perspective with clients and just always being mindful of fee worthiness to ensure clients and they fixate on what you're worth, not what you cost. That is a fluid and dynamic reality. And I think that was one of the best things that happened in the space for all parties involved. And I like to see how that's continuing. And to your point about just looking down the road directionally, I'm fascinated by how the enlightened financial professional is positioning alternative investments that are normally outside of their purview and process, how to position that for the advisor to have eyes on what their clients are doing outside of what they're currently doing with their advisor. That is a fascinating study as well.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and technology, I think, is going to help in that, help in ways to aggregate that information and make it easier to put all that together in one snapshot or one dashboard view. So, to some extent, I think that's already here, but certainly as tech continues to advance, I think it's going to be even more common for that to be available to advisors to offer to clients.
Yes, absolutely. And that old expression, it's not what you say, it's what they hear. How a client interprets the advisor's positioning is so key because back to your point about the old transactional approach, that was more sort of opportunistic and coin operated, where an advisor would ask a client to buy something. Now they're asking a client to buy into something. And of the many sort of layers of what they're asking the client to really appreciate and buy into is the fact that the advisor's got a fluid and dynamic, panoramic and all-encompassing process and positioning alternatives. And I know this is near and dear to you. Engineering this reality where the advisor is always the first call. It's always before a decision gets made, never after. And I talk to advisors all the time, as you do, and they love it when a client will call up and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting a new car. Should I buy or lease? Can I afford it?" I mean, they don't make any meaningful decision. And now it's like, "Hey, I've got a buddy that's getting involved in a private equity deal, or I've got a friend that's doing a biotech private placement, or a bunch of friends, we want to go in on some farmland. What do you think?" Like they always call the advisor and say, "Hey, can you give me your perspective on this?" That adds to fee worthiness and being indispensable to a client.
Yeah, and it's funny you should mention that first call. I was just having a call this morning with one of my clients, and he runs a family office, and he gave me a couple examples of where he was the first call as we were actually having this very conversation. And one of the examples that he gave was one of his clients recently had a health situation and needed to see a specialist. Well, the waiting line to see this specialist was like weeks and weeks long. So he calls my client and says, "Hey, do you know anybody or do you know somebody who knows somebody?" And lo and behold, he does. So what happens, instead of it being weeks and weeks, it's 5 days later. And his client gets in to see this doctor. So, an example of what great advisors can do who are well connected. And does he technically get paid for that? One could argue no, that's not technically what he's getting paid for. But my goodness, the value that something like that adds to the relationship and to the stickiness and the ability of the advisor to be a nexus in situations that the advisor may see fairly often. If they have hundreds of clients in their whole practice, that's going to happen from time to time. And whereas in a client's life, it may only be one time and they don't know what to do. So let me call my advisor who's seen this before.
This is another part of the shift and the evolution I love is advisors who are expanding their thinking away from, okay, I've got all these relationships with COIs, right? Center of influence, whatever the case may be, which can be misconstrued, misperceived by clients. Now they're evolving into saying, okay, I've established a vast network, and vast being an acronym, a value added support team, a vast network of other service providers that I engage into the process. It does amplify fee worthiness because now it's positioned as a value added service that clients really find to be of value. It's not pitched as a one off, it's positioned. And the key, the art, is when the advisor starts to really future pace this, to get a client to understand that, look, there's parts of our process and our value added services that might not be relevant to you today or even soon, but down the road, as your life unfolds and your needs evolve, there's no mystery. I mean, we've cracked the code. We've got our value added support team. We've got the process built out. And that future pacing, they buy into directionally where this is going. That's planning. It's not just the static plan. It's the fluid and dynamic planning that adds to fee worthiness for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like how you framed it. You said a few moments ago, we're shifting from the client buying something to buying into something. And I love how you frame that because I can totally picture what that looks and feels like from the client perspective and from the advisor as they build out something that is worth buying into. So I love that. And I think it leads naturally into where the industry is heading. And so I think a couple big things I want to talk about here with you. One is, where is the industry heading? And then the second is, how are we actually going to deliver our services in the future as part of where this industry is heading? And I've had a lot of conversations around this in recent times. I'm sure you have as well. Advisors are having these conversations too. And recently, Alan Smith, who is a top advisor over in the UK, he was on a podcast of mine here, Between Now and Success, recently. And Dan Halett was on that particular episode as well. Both those guys are big thinkers, doing great job for their clients. Alan recently came out with an article on LinkedIn that I think is a great jumping off point for us. And he was making the argument that wealth management is reaching what he would call its Spotify moment. And he wrote a great article. It was a very enjoyable read. And he tied in David Bowie, who in 2002 did an interview with the New York Times. And essentially what David Bowie said back in 2002 was, be prepared for a very different future in the music business. And he said, essentially, copyright provisions are going to go away. The big music organizations that control all the music rights and distribution and everything, that's pretty much going to go away. And music is going to become like electricity. And so the only thing that is going to remain of value, if you are a musical performer, singer, songwriter, is the live experience, is the concert experience. And lo and behold, that's pretty much what has happened. That if you look around the music business, the only people making money are the ones that are out there actively touring right now, because the live experience is the one thing that can't be digitized away. So we've got digital music, we've got Spotify, we've got streaming, we've got all these different ways to listen to music. And those artists are only getting, fractions of a penny every time one of their songs is streamed. And so it's that live experience that is going to continue. And so Alan was trying to make the argument or the comparison that is that what's going to happen to financial services, where because of AI is going to make the development of the financial plan, all the technical aspects of what an advisor does, it's going to make that happen in an instant, and it's going to drive the cost of that close to zero. So then we have to ask ourselves, what is the what is the equivalent in financial services to sort of the live touring of the music business? And so let me just stop there and see if you have any reaction or how you think about that.
Okay, so first of all, you had me at David Bowie
Yeah,
because I'm a
we're,
massive fan. I
we're
saw
in agreement
him.
on that.
Yeah, I've seen him live before. The first concert I saw him in was actually in 1987. It was the Glass Spider tour where yet again he reinvented himself. He was never, I mean, you look at his evolution, his trajectory, incredible. You might recall, I think it was in 97, he had what he called, I think it was sort of affectionately called the Bowie Bond,
Mm.
where he monetized his catalog and he basically leased it. It ended up getting purchased, I think, a few years ago entirely. But in that window, he had a sort of a consumption lease agreement for about 10 or 15 years. Very lucrative. Okay. So I love that as a metaphor. And by the way, Steve, I just have to say, like, I've listened to and watched a number of your podcasts. You do an exceptional job drawing out parallels to other sectors, to financial services, which is, a rare skill. So I commend you on
Thank
that.
you.
But
I appreciate
to
that.
link it, okay, this is okay. So let me link what you were saying there with Bowie as an analogy, a metaphor to financial services. And this is not a stretch. Number one, every business is built to be sold. And every investment of effort you make working on your business culminates in the eventual delayed gratification of your end game and exit strategy. The incrementalism of that is profound. Number one. Number two, your enterprise value is no longer just driven by your EBITDA and your EBOC and recurring, and it's now driven by something that is so incredibly powerful, and that is your intellectual property. So, we've both been around long enough. Back in the day, advisors would really define themselves and achieve professional contrast based on their knowledge, product knowledge, credentials, historical knowledge. Very important. That was enough then. Now, barely a minimum requirement. So they evolved from knowledge, being a knowledge for profit professional who thinks for a living, looking into the future, helping a client look to the future with anticipation, making these decisions instead of apprehension. Then they shifted from knowledge to expertise. They joined the expertise economy. Advisors started adding depth and breadth to their solution set, started adding bench strength to elevate the client experience. Now, and this was brought to life, especially in the last 5 years, from knowledge to expertise to intellectual property. This is where you start to get everything out of your head. You get it formally professionalized, standardized, optimized, digitally, physically, and you start to position this so that clients actually don't just trust you in terms of your qualities as a person. They start to really trust your practice and the client experience it provides and your process. This is incredible. This drives enterprise value. This drives bandwidth and scale to ensure plateau avoidance. And it's incredibly fulfilling. So, to reverse engineer that, Steve, these are the questions I ask advisors in the spirit of moving towards IP. I say, what is it that a client can only get from you? Okay, so if within 100 miles of your desk, there's 1,000 financial advisors, what is it a client can only get from you? Is it your technical ability, your core competency, the way you manage money? No, they can get that elsewhere. Now, with AI, that's going to become even more commoditized. What they can only get from you is your client experience, the way you conduct yourself and how they feel about belonging to your community, and your process that puts every piece of the financial puzzle together for them as their life unfolds and their needs evolve. So the enlightened advisor starting to understand that practice management and relationship management are just as important as asset management. So I would say that moving in that direction, being an early adopter, and it's not too late to be an early adopter on that, that's the advisor's Spotify moment that will drive their enterprise value, amplify their recurring revenue, and frankly, just as importantly, restore liberation and order to their life. So I love the tie-in. I hope that's not, too much of a stretch, but that's my view.
Yeah. So from knowledge to expertise to IP. So no podcast would be great without some conflict. So let me push back
Love
a
it.
little bit. And when you talk about IP, when you first started talking about that, I thought, I'm not sure that IP is going to be in this age of AI. I'm not sure that IP is going to be anything that we can protect. But then I heard you talk about you had more of an expansive definition of IP to include the process, to include the experience. So then you got me when you expanded the definition with that. And one way that I think about this, and I think we're pretty much on the same page here, is as I think about what AI is going to do. So first and foremost, it's going to improve our technical abilities in that it
Mhm.
can think faster than we can. It can absorb more stuff than we can. It can synthesize. It can see patterns better than we can as humans. So it's going to completely supplement our ability to be a more effective and technically proficient advisor. Now, that does not negate the need for the advisor to be extremely technically competent at what they do. And I've said this many times in many different formats that the advisors who are going to best succeed with AI are the ones who are subject matter experts in this business. And you can't outsource your knowledge to AI. So that's sort of one thing is we got the technical piece is going to help improve the plan. The second piece is the experiential piece that you're talking about here in that, and this is what Alan Smith, I think, was getting at as well. And he pulled in a book from Pine and Gilmore that goes back, gosh, I don't know, 30 plus years or so ago, maybe 40 years ago, about the experience economy. And those
Mhm.
two gentlemen were really early in thinking about how as as technology helps commoditize things, particularly services, what's left? Well, what's left is the actual experience. And so that to me is sort of, I'd call that maybe phase two. So if phase one is AI is going to help enhance the technical piece, two is AI and other technology coupled with human is going to enhance the experiential piece. And then the third, and what I might say is the final piece, and this is actually the fifth piece of what Pine and Gilmore talk about, is the idea of transformation. And so, where I think I might extend what you're talking about is to this idea of transformation. And I think advisors are one of the few people who are in a position to help their clients transform the way they think about their money, the way they think about their life. Because if you are the first call, and you and I had talked about, the idea of being the first call in a podcast I did on your show here recently, advisors who are self-aware, who are skilled, who have high EQ have the ability to have conversation and be in relationship with another human being in a way that's going to help them transform how they see themselves, how they see their money, how they conduct themselves, how they live their life. And so to me, I sort of look at this as the three steps. One is the technical piece, the second is the experiential, and then the third is the transformational. Now, not everybody's going to get to that third piece for sure. If you stop at number two, I think you're doing really well if you get to that
Right.
level. So be curious how you think about all that too.
Well, first of all, spot on. So it's interesting. Everybody's talking about what AI can do. And I'm like, well, what can't it do? What is it that AI can't do? That's the unmet need. That's the opportunity.
Yeah, and
And what
that's
it
the big
can't,
question. That's really the key question.
well,
Yeah.
here, the sweet spot. I know you're big on balance, right? The business serving your life, not the other way around. Being in Zen, that's okay. So the sweet spot, a balance in this context, high tech, high touch. AI does not have EI. It can pretend to have emotional intelligence, but come on. So the advisors who fixate solely on their technical ability to achieve professional contrast are going to be facing some headwinds. Some will be on a collision course with obsolescence. Those who they'll be eliminated. Those who are liberated are those who embrace AI to go deeper into what it is that a client really craves and appreciates. That is the safe harbor dynamic, okay? You don't wing it. You've got to you run your business like a business. Like, okay, I'll give you an example. I say to an advisor, I say, so how many prospective clients have you met in your career? And they're like, well, hundreds. Where is that process? You get an introduction from an advocate, you connect with a prospective client for the first time. Where is the process to create professional contrast, to connect with this person, to bring them up to the signing ceremony? Where is it? I go, how many steps are in it? I don't know. You got to know your number. You got to build it out. Now, here's the thing about AI. You can go onto AI right now and say, I'm a financial professional with this firm. I work with this type of client. I have this many people on my team. Build me a fit process so when I meet a prospective client for the first time, they feel compelled to want to work with me. Give it that prompt. Wait 5 seconds. You'll have an entire progression in your hands to get it. If it's in your head, it's a skill. If it's documented, it's intellectual property. Now, I've had some advisors say, well, okay, that sounds fine and good, but what's the point? I'm like, A, you're putting sand in your hourglass, being more consistent and efficient. B, make it client facing. When you sit down with an accountant or an attorney or another influencer, a client, and you say to them, hey, just so you know, we're going through an exercise right now for the purposes of elevating the client experience. We're adopting best practices. And as you know, we only accept new clients who are introduced to us. I just wanted to show you, if you ever happen to introduce someone to us, this is what they can expect. And you actually show them your fit process. Now it's client facing IP. Now it makes you more referable. Now, Steve, that's just one of the four primary quadrants. Then you do your onboarding process. You can go to ChatGPT right now and say, build me an onboarding process so when I engage with a new client, I can transition them from their soon to be former environment to ours, exceed their expectations, and amplify my referability because they'll become advocates. And wait 5 seconds. You start to get it all out of your head based on the rule of three. The rule of three says anything you do three or more times, three or more steps, has to be documented. Now you've got an entire fit process built out. Then you can build out a service model. Then you can build out a goals-based relationship management protocol. This is when an advisor embraces technology and then thinks in terms of the hand in glove, meaning, okay, it's going to liberate me to level up, they put so much distance between themselves and everybody who's just sort of either treading water or just plugging along. This is next level.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that. And my mind thinks like that as well. I'm very much a process, structure, order kind of guy, but I can also do a 180 and do just the opposite of that as well. But what I also like about having the structured process like that is as you take people through that experience, you see what resonates with them, you see what connects with them, you see what works with them, and what doesn't. And so you adjust the process, just like the
Very good
financial
point.
plan is not a plan, it's planning. So just like the process you're talking about, it's not a process, but it's processing, I would argue, that you
It's
adjust
good.
it over time so that you can enhance that process over time and it becomes sort of a living, breathing process as you get feedback from people who go through it. And then that I think continues to build that moat, that continues to build the IP that you're talking about here. That is your secret sauce that differentiates you from the other advisors. And
I'm going to
yeah,
trademark that somehow. Okay. Processing, like
yeah,
somehow I can twist that. But that's
yeah.
very, very profound.
I, I,
I was in Vancouver yesterday and I spoke to a very high quality group of financial advisors. And I had an advisor there kind of respectfully push back a little bit on some things. And my response was balance the art and science. Because his pushback to me was, look, there are meaningful skills that my clients have told me they really appreciate with me. And you're trying to sort of marginalize those by being more process driven. And I said, no, I'm trying to help you find your balance and your sweet spot so that they're both appreciated because, and he did sort of open up because there are some advisors who are getting a little bit bogged down with the minutia, some of the hassle factors and the things that they don't like to do. And some advisors, Steve, and you probably heard this too, the getting bogged down has actually prompted to start thinking about winding down because they've kind of lost their spark and some of their passion because of all the firefighting and some of the nonsense. So if you think of the progression, bog down, wind down, I say, you know what? Let's start thinking about growing down, where you can start to simplify your life based on the number of relationships you manage so you can grow up market. You can level up how you're perceived and described by the right people who you're really suited for. And you can, the zooming out and the leveling up around being strategic around blind spots and where this is going to rejuvenate your passion. That's one of the most fulfilling things I've seen is the metamorphosis of an advisor who is kind of declining, circling the drain, whatever you want to call it, and they're restored because of focusing on what they really enjoy doing. Is that's very exciting to me.
yeah. And as we're talking about this idea of the experience and the idea of helping transform clients' lives, I hear all the time too from advisors that that's the thing that just super that they love about what they do is when they
Yeah.
see a client's lives light up, when they have an aha moment, or when they really get something, or they've been able to retire long before they ever thought they'd be able to with more money than they could ever imagine, and now they're able to help family members or their philanthropies. And those are the moments that I think advisors say, okay, this is all worth it, to have those moments. And I think what we're talking about here is like technology may enable advisors to be able to have that happen more often, because if you've got technology that can do some of the grunt work, and if you have the systems in place and the processes in place like you're talking about to systematize the routine so that you can humanize the exceptions sort of thing, then you've got the ability to go deeper with clients. You've got the ability
Good.
to know more about them. And you've got the ability, and with this, again, with this advisor I was talking to this morning, we were talking about sort of the doctor analogy and how most doctors, there's the stereotype that they may have, I don't know, 30, 40 appointments a day. And so they're in there 10 minutes or so, and then they're on to the next one. And they don't necessarily have a reputation as a wonderful bedside manner. Well, it's sort of because of the way their work is structured. Their business model is, I've got to meet with so many patients a day. I don't have time to really get to know them, which I hope is the opposite of what our profession is. And hopefully, with technology, it will allow us to have more time to spend with them, to have more opportunities for transformational outcomes with them. And I know sometimes if I talk about transformation, some people may think, oh, that's sort of a woo woo word, make it more practical to me. And I think about it in terms of, there's a great quote from Marcel Proust, and he said, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And so I think of transformation as simply seeing through new eyes. So it may be the same thing, but you're looking at it totally differently. You have a whole different viewpoint. You have a whole different awareness of that than you did before. And I think, again, advisors are in a unique position to be the person who can help engender transformational outcomes. And I think as advisors spend more time thinking about how can I engineer those, so to speak, getting back again to your process idea, if I've got a process that works and I walk people through a process, it almost naturally leads to transformational outcomes because I've done it so many times and I know what has to happen for people to get to that aha moment. So I think the combination of the process, adjusting the process over time, being intentional about it can lead to more frequent transformational outcomes, which then leads to advisors loving their job and staying with it longer and having even more and deeper success with it.
Well, and back to your analogy about the doctor and the 30 appointments, I mean, what a grind.
Right.
And pumping up a leaky tire and kind of a little bit hollow in terms of the social dynamic. I do like your soundbite there around process will systemize to enable you to humanize. And that's going to become the the more technology creeps into our lives, the more the human touch is going to matter. It's not going to take it away. It's going to amplify its impact and appreciation. So, yeah, I really like that a lot.
Good. All right. Well, I do want to talk about how advisors are going to actually deliver their service a little bit. But before we really step into that, anything else that you want to add on sort of this idea where the industry is heading, what technology is going to enable or not enable?
You know, I talk to a lot of advisors, finger on the pulse type conversations, and I'm generally interested in what nirvana looks like for them personally and professionally in the next 5 to 10 years. But I'm also crowdsourcing where advisors think this is all going. The writing's on the wall in so many respects. And I come back to, of course, alternative investments. I ask advisors, are your clients asking you about investment opportunities outside of your traditional purview? And consistently, advisors are saying, my most complex, my best clients, like those clients that are up there, financially independent, complex needs, yeah, they're starting to look outside of traditional markets. You know, it's fascinating. I had a conversation with an advisor. We were talking about alternative investments, and I said, go on to ChatGPT. And I said, give it this prompt. I'm a financial advisor. Provide me a list of the variety of alternative investments my clients could consider that are outside of a traditional financial advisor's deliverable. That prompt, and the advisor was blown away at everything. We had a conversation. It was an amazing conversation about precious metals, an amazing conversation about blockchain, amazing conversation about intrinsic value assets. I said, I want you to take that list and professionalize it, customize it to future pace for your clients. To when you're meeting with some of your best clients in a strategy and tactical meeting, show them your version of this list and say, as we look down the road and future pace, where this is all going, many things are going to be presented to you. Many ideas are going to come to light. As a value-added service, I will be a sounding board for you to help you with the signal to noise ratio. Even though, and you're not saying this, but basically, I don't need to be compensated for this. This is part of my process. This is part of my value, that future pacing. I think this is something I'd like to see advisors get way out in front of, not react, like be predictive, position it directionally. I think this will be absolutely non-optional going forward. And we can expand on that if you wish, but I
Yeah.
think that's a big, big deal.
Yeah. And where my mind goes when you talk about that is advisors have to be open-minded because I'm very open to alternative investments. And you're talking gold, Bitcoin. I mean, I did a podcast on Bitcoin for heaven's sakes, a separate one, and did about 30 episodes because I wanted to learn more about it. And so I went out to the best and the brightest who knew about Bitcoin and did deep dives all the way from I had several philosophy professors who were Bitcoiners, and we talked about the philosophy of Bitcoin for crying out loud. I mean, we really got into some very, very fascinating topics. But when I would post something on LinkedIn about Bitcoin, or I would post something on LinkedIn about gold, yeah, I would get slammed by other advisors. They're like, they'd say, "Oh yeah, well, look at in this time period, gold went from you know $1,500 down to $600 over 10 years. So why would I ever put my client in that?" And, so they always cherry pick and blah, blah, blah. So I think the key takeaway that I think I get from what you're talking about there when it comes to alternatives is it's not so much the specific investment as it is the specific mindset that you bring to being an advisor. And that as things are changing so fast, whether it's with AI, whether it's with prediction markets, whether it's with crypto or blockchain or numerous other private investments that are available today, it's like we got to have an open mind. I mean, all of life is about innovation. And if we're not open to innovation, if we're not receptive to it, at least be curious about it. Be interested in
Well,
it. It doesn't hurt
Steve,
anything, and
you
it's
got to
only
read
upside.
the room. You got to read the room. I I say to advisors all the time, make your clients the voice you listen to. You don't have to listen to me. Are your clients coming to you because their son, who will be a client of yours, is talking to them about cryptocurrency? I have studied cryptocurrency. I have turned it upside down. I am absolutely convinced this plays an absolute role in our future. Now we're probably going to need another podcast
Yeah.
on cryptocurrency and blockchain. I personally have really studied the blockchain technology that has ISO 20022 approval, or the company's got patents because the use case is incredible. Okay, so we can come back to crypto for a second, but nothing stops this. It is going to play a role in terms of DeFi, decentralized. You know, clients are asking advisors about it. Okay, so park that for a second. I read a book in the early 90s that resonates with me today. I go back and read my summary every now and again. John Kenneth Galbraith's book, A Short History of Financial Euphoria, a 2,000-year historical tour of human nature and money, speculating, investing, saving, all of it. It is essential reading. And I look at the historical context of gold. I say to advisors, are your clients starting to ask you about precious metals? Look at the performance. Yeah, I listen to this. Okay, gold recently overtook treasuries as a reserve asset for central banks. I looked this up and verified it. In the last, I think it was 5 years, central banks have purchased 4,800 tons of gold. That's, if my math is right, about 150 million ounces. Now, people say, well, there's no yield, it's cumbersome. Okay, wait a second. Coinbase announced that they're going to tokenize and allow their clients to buy gold and precious metals on Coinbase. So if you tokenize gold, you don't have to hand the person gold. You do a peer-to-peer transaction because it's trustless. It's verified that the gold is there. Oh my gosh, we could have a series of webinars and master classes on this. The bottom line is a financial advisor, to your point about being open, the clay is soft, not getting bogged down in their confirmation bias, but just looking around. If clients are starting to ask about it, I can't remember if you and I talked about this. I talked about this with somebody not long ago. Financial advisor was telling me one of his best clients came up to him they were talking in a meeting, and he said, "Hey, I just got to tell you. So I've got this crazy brother. He's way, way over here in his worldview, his mindset, his belief system. Good guy, but a little tough to take sometimes. He's been telling me for years, buy gold, buy silver, buy platinum." And I'm like, come on. Then I have some family over. He just tells me, here, pulls up his phone, Chat GPT, asks it 4 questions about precious metals. The brother, the client of the advisor, is dumbfounded. And he goes back to the advisor and says, I don't think he's crazy. What do you think? Read the room. Make your clients the voice. Be open, as you said, directionally. Where is this going? The writing's on the wall. There will always be bonds and stocks and private credit and all kinds of things to invest in. But your role as a fiduciary is going to expand. Now, to your point, sorry, I'm rambling, but your point, all of it has to be positioned as part of the process. Steve, I've got a video. It's pretty painless. It's called 7 Pillars, 1 Process. It's how to get your clients to buy into the process, not buy individual things transactionally. It's reframing the relationship with future pacing in mind. It's painless. It's incredible. I could parade 1,000 advisors through this room would say, game changer in terms of how I'm perceived and how I'm described. So if you want to make that available to your community, I'd be more than happy to, because it's time tested. Anyway, sorry, a
Yeah.
lot there.
Yeah. No, we'll link to that in the show notes. So I'll get the link from you after we're talking here. So you mentioned Coinbase. So lo and behold, I did want to talk about Coinbase here because they recently announced that they were cutting about 14% of their workforce. And Brian Armstrong, who's the co-founder and the CEO of the firm, wrote a letter to the team to explain why they were doing this and how they were doing it. And this really leads into how are we actually going to deliver our services in the future. Now, you could argue that, hey, I don't know that I want to listen to Brian Armstrong or that I want to take my leadership guidance from Coinbase, but the reality is it's a high-tech company, it's a successful company, and a lot of ideas come out of Silicon Valley that ultimately end up getting adopted in other industries. And of course, Coinbase is essentially a brokerage firm for crypto and other types of products like that. And they're a very different business than what financial advisors do. But again, I want to share part of what Armstrong said, and then we can discuss how this may or may not be applicable to the way advisors are going to think about how their business is structured going forward. So I'm going to read just a little bit here He talks about AI. It's changing how we work. Over the past year, I've watched engineers use AI to ship in days what used to take a team weeks. Non-technical teams are now shipping production code, and many of our workflows are automated. The pace of what's possible with a small focused team has changed dramatically, and it's accelerating every day. He goes on to say, here's what this means. And so I'm going to share three ideas that he shared in terms of how they're structuring the way Coinbase delivers its service. So he said, first, fewer layers, faster decisions. He said, we're flattening our org structure to 5 layers max below the CEO. Layers slow things down and create coordination tasks. The future is small, high context teams that can move quickly. Leaders will own much more with as many as 15 plus direct reports. Fewer layers also means a leaner cost structure that is built to perform through all market cycles. Okay, so the first one, fewer layers. Second point he made was no pure managers. Every leader at Coinbase must also be a strong and active individual contributor. Managers should be like player coaches, getting their hands dirty alongside their teams. And then the third point he made here was AI native pods. We'll be concentrating around AI native talent who can manage fleets of agents to drive outsized impact. We'll also be experimenting with reduced pod sizes, including one-person teams with engineers, designers, and product managers all in one role. And then he goes on to say, in short, AI is bringing a profound shift in how companies operate, and we're reshaping Coinbase to lead in this era. This is a new way of working, and we need to leverage AI across every facet of our jobs. And then the final thing I want to mention here, and then we can discuss this, is he had a line here that I thought was intriguing. And he said, to get there, we are not just reducing headcount and cutting costs, we're fundamentally changing how we operate, rebuilding Coinbase as an intelligence with humans around the edge aligning it. I thought, rebuilding Coinbase as an intelligence with humans around the edge aligning it. So anyway, I thought this was all fascinating stuff. Would love to hear your take on what, if any of that, may be applicable to how advisors should be thinking about organizing their businesses going forward.
Well, you covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah.
First of all, just backing up for, I was first made aware of AI, retail AI, not the concept of AI. AI is not new. It's just new to us. You go back to 2001, the movie AI, you look at movies, The Matrix, Terminator, I mean, Minority Report, iRobot, they're all AI based, right? Machine learning, etc. So now here we are, it's now in our hands. It's in our clients' hands, it's in our hands. It got I started it about 3 years ago. I've never seen anything come out of virtually nowhere and have this degree of impact and escalation in terms of functionality in 3 years. So what does that look like in the next three? It will probably continue to gather steam. Now, then it starts to converge. Then you start thinking about blockchain, quantum, and other technologies converging. I think it's non-optional that we have to be serious students about this. It's funny, you were reading from that Armstrong letter, and he used the word shipping. Shipping. You know, back in the day, software companies used to ship boxes of software, and now it's not, there's no FedEx. It's all delivered. But my point here is the middleman is under siege. The counterparty, the conduit between the buyer and the seller, that's going to be reimagined completely. And the advisor's got to figure out, okay, how can I level up? And part of that is going back to what we were talking about earlier, like what is it about your value that clients can still hold in their hands? You know, going from vapor to paper, like having physical things that speak to your intellectual property. You know, I talk about that, especially in this book, extensively. Intellectual property that is physical, not just digital. And the point here is Steve, like if you're my financial advisor and I'm your client, I'm curious what when the client's alone with his thoughts at home, at the office, wherever, and they're thinking about their advisor, what comes to mind? Oh, I trust him. He's a good guy. He's smart. He's professional. Or do I start to think with more depth and breadth around your value? You know, you got a great process. Oh, you gave me a personal financial organizer, you know, that has everything. I just feel like it's the keystone. Everything's contained and easy. I can show it to my wife. I can show it to my brother. You know, does my perception impact my description of you becoming an advocate? I know a financial advisor, by the way, in a personal financial organizer, there's a few of my favorite tabs. One of them is assets outside of the process. And the advisor says to the client, look, you're at a stage in your life and the track you're on, your life is going to get complex when it comes to investments and asset management and, you know, generationally, all of these different things, liquidity events. I just want to get so far out in front of that. And the tab in the PFO that speaks to that lists every single thing I might entertain as a client in my lifetime. All of my developing needs, potential unmet needs, blind spots, everything. And then I think to myself, wow, there's a lot here, but fortunately he's got a process in place. This is where it's going to get very, very exciting. And yeah, Henry Ford said in his interesting quote, he said, if I gave people what they wanted, I would have given them a faster horse. You know, you got to find this balance between what a client tells you they want and anticipating what they're going to want as their life unfolds and progresses. That's leadership. That's fiduciary. That's the advisor of the future. So you said it earlier, just being open. The clay has to be soft and just looking at where this is all going, using discernment to put it all together. I'm absolutely convinced the rejuvenational benefits of this around calling, purpose, and fulfillment are going to be amped up to an entirely new level just by having this conversation and imagining how I can deploy this in my client experience as a financial advisor. And I know advisors that are on this path right now. This is the best time of their life right now.
Yeah, and I think it's going to greatly challenge advisors, as we've been discussing essentially to step up or step into this opportunity here.
Yeah.
And a thought experiment that I've been sharing with a lot of clients here recently is actually more earlier this year as we're sort of thinking about the annual business plan. I said, okay, let's look at your 3-year plan. And let's say your business is, I'm picking a number, double your business in 3 years. Well, then the thought experiment is, what would you have to do to be able to double your business in 3 years without increasing your headcount? And so the idea is, with everything that's happening with technology, what would you have to do to double and not increase headcount? So that may be some combination of technology. It may be some combination of rethinking who your ideal client is. Maybe it's fewer clients, but higher net worth clients. And so it's going to force sort of a rethink within a constraint. And we know that the most creativity comes when we're under some kind of constraint. And so that is sort of the constraining factor, the forcing function, if you will. And so I think that's something to think about. And I think that kind of gets back to what Armstrong was talking about here at Coinbase, which is, he said that, you know, we have to act as individual sort of player coaches. Managers need to be player coaches. We have these AI native pods where we'll be experimenting with pod sizes of one, where that one person is the engineer, they're the designer, they're the product manager, they're all of that in one role. And they can do that because A, you have to hire super talented people to begin with to do that. And I think that's another thing that's going to shift here with technology is we're going to have to hire really smart people. And when you do that, then they can, and as Armstrong's saying, we're going to manage a fleet of agents. Now, again, this may sound like, oh, this is sci-fi kind of stuff. But again, thought experiment. Let's think conceptually about this. What does this mean as an advisor for who I need to hire in the future? If AI is going to have all these agents and I need to have fewer people but higher impact, so that might mean I got to hire more talented people. I got to hire people who have the ability to have the high tech and the high touch that you mentioned earlier, because I got to know how to deal with the tech and with the fleet of agents that are under my control. But I also got to have high EQ. I've got to be able to interact with human people because I'm in the human people business. So I think it's an amazing time to be alive. I think it's an amazing time to be a financial advisor. I just hope that I'm healthy and live for decades more so that I can just see how all of this continues to unfold because I think it's just amazing to see what's
Oh,
happening these
you're on a
days.
good path now. And it's interesting, back to what you were saying. I've seen many advisors double. They go from 500 to a billion. And I say to them, do you find it fascinating that nowhere in your breakthrough did you become a better financial advisor? You're always good. You didn't get more time. You still had 24 hours in the day. What did you get better at? It was efficiency, consistency. And it's interesting, back to your point, and this ties into the Armstrong mantra. And, obviously there's a lot going on in that because he's trying to be diplomatic. And I'm sure you peel that back, you could interpret it in a variety of different ways. And
Yeah,
we'll
for
see,
sure.
we'll see what happens. Proof will be in how they conduct themselves in the next 12 to 36 months. But my point is, advisors have this profound eureka moment when they realize the goal is not to see how big I can get. It's how small I can stay. This comes out of the conversation about the Pareto principle and the 80-20 rule. I talked to an advisor, plateaued, maxed out, bogged down, all of these things, 350 clients, and we do the 80-20 rule. Classic, right? So you've got, and I say to them, you've got 70 to 100 clients who carry the freight. Now let's do 80-20 on the 20. Let's look at your top 30 clients, let's just say. Let's look at some commonalities. And if you look at that spectrum of refinement going forward, there's automate, there's allocate, there's populate. Populate with people, but don't throw bodies at it, like process, buy-in, roles and responsibilities. Allocate is, okay, where are you going to steer this? Automate, can you get out of some certain things, right? So you take all that, you combine it. And I've seen so many advisors double by growing down or creating a brand within a brand where they elevate for the 30, 50, 70 clients. They go back and they reintroduce themselves and they say, when we started 25 years ago, I mean, we'd work with anybody. We love what we do. And then we got to this point where we realized, oh my gosh, we're getting so big. And now we're all things to all people. And realizing that I've got a certain group of clients whose needs are a lot more complex. So what we're going to do is we're either going to grow down. Some advisors say we're going to grow down from 350 clients down to 120. So we can go deeper in and get further out in front of the evolving needs of the clients we're best suited for. They go that path, or they say, we're going to create a brand within a brand. We're going to have basically a Lexus to our Toyota, and we're going to elevate the client experience and throw the kitchen sink in terms of resources and process at this group of clients. That professional scarcity dynamic, competitor proofs, gets out in front of those evolving needs, captures money in motion with liquidity events, and creates a higher quality of introductions from that group of people. Those same advisors in the old days, most of their referrals were from the 80% of the clients who generated 20% of the business. And I'm like, that's paradoxical because that's actually that benefit is actually adding fuel to the problem. You want to get referrals from the 20% who represent 80% of the business. It comes down to how they perceive what their degree of how they feel they belong to something and how they represent and articulate your value to people like themselves. It sort of comes back to that. Like we're not trying to see how big we can get. We're going to see how small we can stay, to grow down, to grow up market. That is again one of the many incredible benefits that exist to a financial advisor today.
Hmm. Yeah, and I would just add to that to increase the impact. So
Yes.
it's not necessarily the number of clients that you're working with, but it's the impact. And I've seen there's a number of advisors out there now who have built large platforms where they may not be giving individual advice, whether it's a YouTube channel and they're getting tens of thousands of views on their each YouTube video that they do. I mean, they're really it makes them feel good that they're having that kind of impact and they're able to use some of their knowledge about the business to educate other folks. Of course, some of those people turn into clients, which is wonderful. But I think that's another wonderful thing about financial advisors is they love to educate, they love to help people, and they love to have an impact on people's lives. So,
The only thing I would say is a gentle reminder to that advisor is that old mantra that it's more important to reach people who count than it is to count the number of people you're reaching. Yeah, it feels great to have that kind of reach, but cause and effect, what kind of actual impact is that having on your business and your value proposition, how you're perceived, your branding strategy around narrow casting? You know, it's interesting. I know one advisory team, I was relentless at them telling the world who they're suited for. I said, remove the mystery, demystify for the world who your ideal client is. And their ideal client was primarily a first generation, self made, affluent business owner, primarily. And I said, you've got to stop talking about clients in generalities. You have to be a broken record articulating your value around who that client is. This will become part of your value prop. And sure enough, it has. It is amplified their ability to be referable from strategic partners and advocates to that segment.
yeah, yeah, totally agree. In fact, I just had a podcast that just released, and it's on YouTube as well. And the title of the YouTube video is "A Strong Brand Attracts and Repels." So when we talk
I
about
love
who
it.
our target market audience is, your brand should both clearly identify who we're for, but it should cause the people that you're not for to turn the other way and not go there. So, and if you're trying to reach everybody, you're going to reach nobody because you're
It's
not
funny
giving
you say
anybody a
that
good
because
reason.
I
Yeah.
talked to an advisor not long ago and he was asked by a prospective client. The prospective client said they met for the first time, they were introduced, and the prospective client said, "What's your minimum?" And the advisor was very proud of himself because in the old days he would have said a number or whatever the case may be. But he said, this is what he said effectively. He said, you know, I understand the question. I just need you to know that we don't think that way. You know, we know exactly who we're suited for, but we focus more on the demographics and the socioeconomics of our ideal client. And it just so happens that our clients have, you know, investable assets in excess of $5 to $10 million, but that's not our minimum. We don't think like that. Our ideal client, the client who's a good fit for us, has, you know, needs and attitudinal qualities and realities that make them a perfect fit. It was so well received because, of course, a lot of advisors would pounce on what's your minimum. And he just went the other way and actually activated contrast. And to your point earlier, attracted, didn't chase, didn't pursue, wasn't a sales encounter. I'm trying to convince you. I want you to come to your own conclusions. I want you to close me. I want you to say, you know what? I've heard enough. I think we're a good fit. Would you accept me as a client?
Right.
That's engineered by how you're perceived and that positioning.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Well, Duncan, I think we'll get ready to wrap up here. Is there any final thought, comment, observation? Certainly let people know the best way to reach out to you as well.
Well, thanks. And thanks, by the way. You're doing a great job with what you do. And I know you love what you do. It doesn't feel like work. So thanks for having me on. In terms of getting to know me better, I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can just look for me, Duncan MacPherson. I should pop right up. You can go to paretosystems.com, kick our tires, get to know us a little bit better. We've got all kinds of resources that we make available to help you understand, you know, what we do, who we do it for. We, Steve, like you, we work with winners. No teams don't come to us with problems. I've been saying for years, the advisors who like us the most actually need us the least. There's nothing wrong, there's nothing broken. They just want to get a little better. So LinkedIn's a good place to start. Pareto Systems is a good start. We've got all kinds of resources, books, and digital tools, and I'll make I'll make that video available. 7 Pillars, One Process. We also have our AI white paper for the financial advisor. Now, I've gotten some people chirping at me saying it's 51 pages, like it's too much. So I just say to them, I say, well, put it through AI and ask for a
Yep.
summary. And sure enough, it'll give them a 3 page synopsis. And there's also a prompt sheet. You can go into Copilot right now and say, I'm a financial advisor. Build me a framework for how I can deploy Copilot to elevate the client experience. It will do it for you. It'll actually lay it out for you. I know an advisor who I said he wanted to embrace client reviews. I said, go into AI and say, how do I deploy an automated process to let my clients tell my story through reviews and being compliant? How to source the QR code, how to make it absolutely friction free. And sure enough, AI built out the protocol. You can build out a search engine optimization campaign using AI to be found by the ideal client. Like the world is your oyster. So that white paper can lay out some of those ideas, especially around your intellectual property.
Excellent. All right, Duncan, as always, it's great to catch up with you. Appreciate all the great work that you are doing out there and look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, likewise, Steve. Right back at you. You're doing a great job. Thank you.